Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, distinguished guests, and folks of all stripes, put your hands together for the Space Cadet Sports Podcast. Houston, we have Paul Salazar Jr.
Hey y'all, welcome back to the Space Cadet Sports Podcast, your Houston sports podcast for diehard Houston fans. From a diehard Houston fan, I'm Paul Salazar Jr., your favorite diehard Astros fan podcaster. I am a digital content creator, writer, self-appointed cookie philosopher, and creative multi-hyphenate. Of course, I'm a Houston native and I have the receipts to prove it. I went to the Summit. I went to the Astrodome. I even went to the original Mama Ninfas. I spent the last decade or so as a comedy writer in LA, and now I am podcasting. That's what happens when you hit 10 years out here. You wake up one day calling the movie industry just the industry, and they give you a podcast. Welcome to said podcast. This is what my brother calls the Paul Broad Pod Ball Blog. Hey, brother, check out spacecadetsports.substack.com for the full blog experience, or the full blog experience, depending on how you are hearing me pronounce that. I started Space Cadet Sport. I started the sentence a couple weeks ago, it feels like now. I started Space Cadet Sports as a passion project because most media is infuriating as a diehard long-term fan of the Houston Astros. Here we aren't doom and gloom Houston fans, or worse, national media haters. We love our teams and root them on, but we also want to discuss the ins and outs of our team without too much homerism. Keyword, try. We try to be reasonable and not too hot-takey or reactionary. And now it is time to get to the podcast, folks. We are recording this transmission here in sunny Los Angeles. Right now it is nighttime. Moony Los Angeles? I forgot to mix that up in the script here. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host and co-producer, the Roz to my Frasier. Carla, the dog, is here with me. She may get on mic from time to time. She's got the hot takes on this podcast. On this episode of the podcast, we are going to recap the Texans game, folks. That's right. Football season is over in Houston. It's over everywhere in my heart, truly, folks. Before we completely get into my emotions, as Troy Barnes would say, I do want to give a shout out to my Australian listeners. Long-term fans of the podcast know this. If you're new here, we say a huge g'day, mates, to our listeners in Australia. That's also obviously new listeners. That's because I am just outside of the top 100 of Australian baseball podcasts. So I just want to give them a shout out to all those Australians out there. If you know an Australian, please let them know about this podcast. Hopefully they're also a Houston sports fan. If not, just have them listen to it on double speed. Give us that listen. I appreciate it. Do it for your boy. But we do have to get to some to actually talking about sports at some point, folks. The Texans fell to the Chiefs and the refs, 14-23 on Saturday. Obviously not exactly the result that we were looking for here at Space Cadet Sports. It was a tough loss. Truly, I think it was so tough because for most of the game, you felt like the Texans had hope. At least I thought that. I thought there was hope. Perhaps I was just like the little boy from Angels in the outfield, standing up, flapping my arms, saying it could happen. So I did have hope for most of the game. I was thinking perhaps if they could figure it out, they could pull out a win. My keys to victory in this game, if you go back and listen to the podcast, I believe the previous podcast, folks, I don't know what's happening to me. I'm kind of catching the hiccups. So I do apologize for these weird pauses. It's not just my normal weird speech pattern. I am I'm troubled by these hiccups. But I guess, the keys to victory that I mentioned in the previous podcast, what I'm trying to say is that, they were fairly spot on. If we could hang our hats on anything here, it is that, some of those keys to the game, we're fairly accurate. I said, that we need at least 24 points to win this game. That turned out to be a good call by me. That is the exact amount of points that we would have needed. I mentioned we would need to play outside of the team would have to play outside of themselves for 4 quarters. They would have to play an almost perfect game. Obviously, that didn't happen. I said that we would need a dominant performance by the special teams, like in the previous game. They had some blocked punt, a blocked kick. The special teams in this game and the game versus the Chiefs was inconsistent and struggled. I said that we would need the defense to be who they've been all season. I mentioned the takeaways that the defense would have, the way the defense could score on you. This defense this week was unable to get a takeaway from the Chiefs. I mentioned that the offense needed more consistency. In a way they performed as well as they could have, but a dropped ball here, a bad play call there. It just wasn't quite enough of offense to win this game. The Texans did score every quarter, just not enough to win the game. There was not enough to outlast the Chiefs in the fourth quarter when it really went from being hopeful to being depressing. It was a tough game, folks. I do think, bringing up those keys of victory, I'm pulling those back up because, at the end of the day, it really would have had to the Texans needed a perfect effort. They went out there and they gave the absolute best effort they could. They suffered some really bad play calls. They suffered bad play calls for sure. There were some bad play calls, but they suffered some bad calls from the refs. But overall, the way the Texans played, the way they got through that game, I honestly was pretty proud of them. It wasn't the result we wanted. There were definitely some tougher moments, but I was happy with a lot of the effort. I think obviously the offense is not where the offense needs to be to win playoff games of this caliber. I think that's something that they're going to focus on in the offseason. I think... I don't know. I feel like they're sticking with Bobby Slowick. I know a lot of people have been very critical of him. I've been critical of him on this podcast. I feel like Bobby Slowick listened to my last podcast and he drew up some offense based off of what I was saying. So I'm giving him a pass this week. No, I do think I do think that there is some life in this offense. But it has been a tough season. There has been a lot of stubborn play calling. So I kind of am unsure as to the ceiling of this offense under Bobby Slowick, but that is just, perhaps that's a very emotional take from me right now after the playoff loss. Maybe I need to go back and revisit some games and see how they've been doing as of late. I do not think that he's. It doesn't seem like he's losing his job, at least right now. We'll see what people say going forward. In the ownership, not online. I know if it was up to the people online, Bobby would have been fired. Bobby, like he's my friend. Bobby, he would have been fired, probably like week 4 or so. So we'll see. But I do think the offense, for their personnel and for what they are dealing with, they gave a pretty solid effort. I feel really bad for Fairbairn, the Texans kicker. He had such a great season. He has had such a good career with the Houston Texans. To see him have a tough game in this big of a moment was not very fun for me. He's been a guy that's been on the team for a while, so we've been rooting him on for a while. It's hard to see him in that big moment stumble, but that win was crazy. He had strong wins that were fighting him, and honestly, I'm out here in LA, obviously. I mentioned that in the beginning. I'm here in Southern California, and it's a tough time with the winds out here, too. So, you know what? A big F-U to the wind, blowing those kicks away and blowing embers everywhere out here. The wind is not my friend. The wind is about to catch these hands, if you know what I'm saying, guys. The wind, it was a tough performance for our special teams. In the first play of the game, there was a special teams penalty. Boyd went off field and then pushed Frank Ross, special teams coordinator Frank Ross. Honestly, I didn't even look that up. There's been so much other things that I've been looking up that I forgot that part. That was a part of the story until just now. I'm really not sure what happened there. If you know what happened there, write in a comment, call in to the SpeakPipe, speakpipe.com/Space Cadet Sports. Let me know what happened there. Let me know what's happening with Frank Ross. We wanted Frank Ross to potentially be in a meme this week, but we did not want it to happen this way where he's getting pushed around there. I'm sorry, Frank Ross. That was like a monkey's paw wish for me. I should have been more clear. We want a good meme. But the special teams obviously had a much tougher week this time, much different circumstances out there with the wind in Kansas City and in the cold out there. That was a tough week for Fairbairn. It's hard to see him have a week like that because truly, yeah, he's just a great kicker. It just was a tough night. I think when we're talking about defense here, the thing that cannot be avoided and the thing I'm very proud of myself for really not getting into, at least at the top of this episode, was the refs. Oh, man. I definitely was very frustrated by the refs. If you go to our Instagram account, at Space Cadet Sports, you could see that I was memeing about the refs, if you know what I meme. I don't understand what they were doing, calling those calls, roughing the passer, the one against Mario Edwards. I believe the other one was against Henry To'o. Sorry. I think it was tough to see that big stop. I believe that was a big third down stop by Mario Edwards Jr. getting taken away and giving them fresh downs in a huge place there. I feel like, it's a million little things that changed the momentum of a game, but that really swung the momentum in their favor, was able to lead them downfield to score again. I think when it comes to a team like the Chiefs, every little bit matters. They're so great. They're so dominant. You can't have any little bad thing happen to you in this game, and that was kind of the beginning of it. There was also that roughing the passer called where one of our players went helmet to helmet on another one of our players, not Patrick Mahomes, because of a late slide by Patrick Mahomes. That was incredibly frustrating as well. J.J. Watt tweeted about that, come on, man, what's happening there? Even Troy Aikman, even quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, Troy Aikman was on TV with Joe Buck. That's right, even Joe Buck they were saying how this was kind of ridiculous and how these kind of things need to be addressed in the offseason because, of course, we want to keep players safe, especially here at Space Cadet Sports. Look, folks, we care very much and very deeply about player safety. That's just, bottom line here. But these, we don't want people getting blown up unnecessarily. But some of these calls where you're protecting the quarterback is just protecting them a little bit too much in a game that is as violent as football. These guys are having to put the brakes on. These guys are having to be very mindful of their hits. We should be protecting the quarterback, but some of these are a little too much. And there was a moment where Patrick Mahomes was jogging off field, and he kind of slowed down as he was getting to the sidelines, waited for To'o to push him, and as soon as he got pushed, he went for the flop. And the refs didn't call that one, but it showcased the fact that Mahomes knows that he's getting these calls. I think flopping and stuff like this happens. I'm not villainizing the flop. I think it was silly. I think it was pretty funny that it didn't get called. Don't get me wrong, but that's the rules, and if the rules are swung that so hard that way, maybe it's time to look at the rules. So I do think the calls, the roughing the passer calls were very frustrating, definitely swung the momentum in the Chiefs' favor. But there are all kinds of other little things that happened to the Texans that just didn't equate to a perfect game for them. But when we're looking at the stats, the stats were very much in their favor. So it's kind of like the refs when it comes to those big momentum things. They really, really, really do matter. It's Mario Edwards Jr., Joe Mixon. They were both saying in the press basically how they knew they were going to have to battle the refs. D'Amico Ryans, head coach of the Texans, said it's basically H-Town versus everyone. H-Town versus all y'all. He knew that it was essentially going to be the Texans versus the Chiefs and the refs. So we can't blame the entire game on the refs for sure, but we can tell by looking at the stats that those were some huge momentum swings. Not that the Texans would have been able to win without those two calls being there, but that would have been a lot more probable and a lot more likely. When we're looking at the stats, there were still 8 sacks against the Texans, and that's a big one. That's probably the most glaring one for me. The Texans' offensive line did a pretty good job, and in the run game, as usual, but in the pass protection, they had a really tough game. And this is going to be something that will have to be addressed by the Texans in the offseason, as their offensive line just was a tough year for the line. They had 8 sacks against them in this game, and it's hard to keep the offense consistent. Later in the game, the Chiefs just kept bringing pressure, made it very difficult for C.J. Stroud to get anything off. And he was definitely playing a quarterback known for his magic late in games, so that was not a recipe for success for the Houston Texans. There were 5 sacks for the Texans, which was great, definitely. But there were 0 interceptions on both sides. So good thing for Stroud, there was no interceptions, didn't give the ball away. But for the Texans defense, we're looking at a team that's used to some takeaways, that's used to, I was saying, that we're hoping could score some points. Having a Texans defensive touchdown in this game would have brought it a whole lot closer, that's for sure. But there were 0 interceptions in this game on both sides, 0 from the secondary, from the Texans secondary. However, Lassiter and Stingley, did an amazing job in pass protection. A lot of those targets were from people that were not covered by Lassiter or Stingley. I think almost exclusively there were 0 pass receptions allowed by those two. I might not have that completely right. I'm looking at the stats here in the moment. I will definitely verify that later. If you know, definitely you can comment, let me know. If I know I'm not sure about a stat, I try to at least qualify it as such. But I think some of the pass protection just was tough in the middle of the field and other parts of the game. I know Alshire, he definitely struggled in some of the Travis Kelce matchups there in zone. But I mean, what a tough coverage. It happened just 2 times in that game, but having to be in that zone definitely was a tough call at times for that. Travis Kelce was able to have a really good game against the Texans defense. And I think in a way the Texans defense was just kind of looking at making sure they limited Mahomes, they limited the receivers, and they just knew that Travis Kelce, they just kind of let him have some opportunities, and he did really good with those opportunities. When we're looking at the rest of the stats here, the Texans had 8 penalties in this game, which was a huge problem. Penalties have been an issue, but also some of these penalties we feel like were fraudulent here. We're going to take them to court. Maybe later we'll take this to court. We'll see if we'll get an impartial judge to make a ruling. But I think some of these penalties were fraudulent for sure. The Texans had 336 yards in total compared to compared to the Chiefs' 212. So that's stark there. He takes a huge swig of water right after that. But no, I feel like, you know, you look at that, the offense had a really good game. The defense had a really good game in comparison. The Texans had 187 passing yards, and the Texans defense held the Chiefs to 162 passing yards. The Texans had 149 rushing yards. The Texans held the Chiefs to 50 rushing yards. And then when you look at the individual performances, C.J. Stroud was 19 of 28 with 245 yards, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and Patrick Mahomes was 16 of 25 with 177 touchdowns, only 177 yards, 1 touchdown and 0 interceptions. Redacted 177 touchdowns. That did not happen. But I'm sure the refs would have allowed it if they could. But no, I think, you know, we're pointing at these stats to just be like the Chiefs did not have the best game. The Texans had a better game, but still the Chiefs were able to find a way to win. And that's really what makes the Chiefs so dominant. You know, you have to kind of have a perfect game against the Chiefs, and the Texans weren't able to pull it off. I think that this really hurts. It really stings. It was a tough loss. There was times when Travis Kelce was out there dancing that I was like, that's it, man. That's it. This podcast is solely dedicated to learning all of Taylor Swift's interests, and and we're going to love her more than you ever did, Travis. That's what we're promising right now. No, it was a very frustrating game to watch. It was really intense towards the end, where you knew they were in it, and it was just slipping out of their hands and through their fingers there. But this is why I'm saying I'm kind of happy overall with the result. I wasn't expecting to win this game, and we didn't, even though it felt like it was within our grasp. But I do think that this is going to build a better team for next season, and hopefully the team will just keep improving. We have a lot to be optimistic about in Houston with our Texans. To wrap it up really quickly, we're going to talk about our Rockets and Astros very briefly. The Rockets lost their winning streak with the loss to the Kings in a weird gambling line and a weird game yet again, just saying. And then they had a bounce back win against Portland this week coming up. I believe it's tonight. They're playing Detroit. Maybe that's tomorrow. I apologize. And then they're playing Cleveland, and then Cleveland at the end of the week. And with our Houston Astros, you know, the spring training roster was just set. So we're excited about that. We'll be able to talk about that soon. This week, we will discuss the Astros outfield and break down their outfield and how that is looking for the upcoming season on a podcast, which will come out on Thursday. So look out for that. You know, Bregman still has yet to sign as of the recording of this podcast. You know, the rumor mill is saying that he's being reunited with A.J. Hinch in Detroit. We'll see. I think, you know, that is one of the highly likely candidates. We will have to see. And that's going to do it for this transmission, Space Cadets. I want to thank you for listening to this episode. Please smash those buttons for me. Like, rate, review, subscribe, share, kick it, bop it. Hit all of those buttons for me. Pretty please. If you'd be so kind, check out my Substack. That's right. You can go out there to the Substack and get the full blog experience at spacecadetsports.substack.com. You could put your email in there and become a subscriber, get every podcast, every article, and every meme dump sent to you for free. Or you can download the Substack app, search Space Cadet Sports. You just subscribe through there, click that you want notifications instead of emails. You don't get the email, you get a notification every time I have a post, meme dump, or podcast. Reach out on social media at Space Cadet Sports on Instagram and Threads, or you can call in at speakpipe.com/Space Cadet Sports. You can find me on social media. You can find me on social media at Paul Salazar JR on all of the platforms, and I'm active on all the cool ones, or at least I try to be. There's not a lot of cool ones right now. It all feels stressful out there. You can check out my SNL podcast, Sunday morning pre-recorded, available where all podcasts are found. Thanks for listening to this podcast. We really do appreciate it. Remember to be the best that you can be. Keep your head up, kid. And as always, vamos Houston.